A mic check, 1, 2. A mic check, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is actually my second recording of this episode because I mistakenly set up my recording equipment in the wrong manner. So, anywho, we're back. Hello. My name is Justin Reichman, and I tend to tell people that it rhymes with a specimen, but with a J. I'm a budding sociologist who is radically in love with people. And now that love has set me on a quest to figure out how can science be used as a tool to stabilize our social interactions. Now, today's episode is another principle in a pod, and I got this idea from Peas in a Pod. One day I thought to myself, well, if peas serve as the substance of pods, how can principles serve as the substance of this podcast? Get it? Podcast. Anywho, while science is important, it's even more important that we remain sensible to information that we consume and how we use the information to relate to one another. And I believe that through the unpacking of principles, we can develop a strong moral compass when it comes to our daily decision making. So, without further ado, let's dive into today's principle, and that being empathy. This past week, I discussed the social concept of kinship, and I dove into the personal stories of my siblingships. Now, as I spoke on the various lessons that each sibling dynamic had taught me in our relationship, none of them would have been retained without the principle of empathy. And that is being the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And that's why sibling relationships are so powerful because they are our longest lasting relationships over a lifetime, and you're bonded by blood, and you can never fully walk away from them. They truly are a once in a lifetime companionship. Before we fully dive into this episode, I want to give a shout out to all of my only child listeners. While I've discussed empathy in the context of siblingships, this principle can be transferable to all of your interpersonal relationships. And maybe it can give you insight to the relationship dynamic between your parents and your aunts and uncles. Or perhaps if you are in the process of getting engaged, this can help you warm up to the idea of your brother and sisters in law. Now, on that note, let's turn our attention to the one and only Merriam-Webster dictionary to create a foundation for our principle of empathy. In the dictionary, they define empathy as the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another person. Examples of empathy can be seen as active listening, validating another's feelings, offering support, or considering others' perspectives. Now, empathy becomes the pathway for how we engage with others. I would argue that it's a pathway that people don't actually embark upon, which is why we brought this principle to this here podcast. While we have the textbook definition, I want to offer a new perspective, and that is empathy is sacrificial in nature. When you hear the word sacrifice, your thoughts may run to perhaps the Christian faith. Maybe you may think of a sacrificial bunt in a baseball game, or maybe a sacrificial move in a chess match. Now, what these three examples of sacrifice and sacrificial reflect is a person's ability to give up something important or high valued for the sake of other considerations. And that's why I would argue that empathy, in its nature, is sacrificial, because it requires you to give up either your time, your perspective, or resource to fully consider another person. Hence why I made the comment earlier that most people don't actually embark upon the path of empathy. And to make that case even stronger, I'm going to virtually bring myself to the witness stand and shed light on my behavior when operating from a non-empathetic place. Now, before we begin, we listen and we do not judge. The first example would be jumping to conclusions. There was a good season in my life where I was so good at jumping to conclusions, you would have thought I had gotten a gold medal in the 2024 Paris Olympics for the long jump. And while I disguised that action under the guise of being knowledgeable or trying to help another person out, I missed the empathy part, which would have shown me two things. One, the actual needs of that person, and two, if I was equipped to even provide that level of support. Which goes into my second example, and that would be not meeting a person where they emotionally are. And I'll use my mom and I's relationship for this example. Over the years, we have had many heart to heart conversations, and I tend to bring a very encouraging perspective to perhaps unsettling news. And I realized that over time, my mom was simply looking for a companion in those conversations. She didn't need a problem solver, nor did she need a solution. Rather, she needed to not be alone in that emotional space. And so, again, that empathetic shift for me was that, hey, instead of just thinking that you know the needs of the other person, how can you simply give the gift of being present and allow that as an opportunity for this person to come to a healthy conclusion on their own? Now, the third and final example is probably my favorite, and that is because it's probably my worst habit of all. And that is promising more than I'm able to do or give. Now, as a person who is an empath, you can totally go about empathy in the wrong way. And if I'm going to be very transparent, I'm currently stepping out of a season where I would just say yes to everything, either because it would bring positive response to the person who asked the question, or maybe I wanted to help resolve an issue, or maybe because I actually just wanted to do that act or do that deed or, go to that event. What I realized is by me overcommitting, it resulted in two things. One, a personal burnout, and two, no longer being a reliable person to others. So while, yes, I had the best of intention, I didn't have a clear perspective of my capacity. Now, this serves as a powerful transition. While I gave a few examples of how operating from a non empathetic place impacted my behavior, I now want to speak to the traits of living an empathetic lifestyle. And again, for any major transition to take place in your life, you have to understand the root of your decision making and plant a new healthy seed. So, the first trait of empathy is that it cannot be situational. If you are only empathetic towards your neighbor, but not your unhoused neighbor, that's a cheeky example of how you have an unhealthy perspective of community and of relationship dynamics. All right. Because again, you can't pick and choose who you're going to apply empathy towards to. It's a principle that you operate from. The next trait is empathy is a tool for building intimacy. Now, if you want to truly hold space for another person, you're going to have to remove yourself from the narrative. And I found my ability to be vulnerable with other people pretty contingent on if the other person was a good listener or not, or if they would ask questions from places of curiosity to learn a little bit more about who I am as a person, rather than assuming they know me based off of perspective, whether that's on social media, whether that's even of comfortability. Because again, you may know someone, but you may not have a new revelation of who they are. So even for my relationships that I've gone well over a decade now, it's like there still has to be that empathetic part that can cultivate intimacy that actually, makes a person feel seen and heard, which goes into the next point. Empathy is not about you. It is about what you can offer another person. And I don't think an example is needed on this one because it's pretty self-explanatory. Next trait is empathy does not expect a rate of return on your actions. As I mentioned earlier, empathy is sacrificial in nature. And here's a beautiful example. A while back, I was having one of those check in conversations with a dear friend who lives on the other side of the country. I know, super convenient. Anywho, when it came to my part of the conversation and I was giving her just the general updates on life, it ended up getting a little bit emotional just because I had walked out of a pretty tough season. Now, at the end of the conversation, I quickly said to her, I'm like, all right, now it's your time. What's your update? And her immediate response was, girl, we don't need to talk about me. It was lovely getting to hear your voice, getting to check in, and to listen to see where you currently are in life. And in that moment, she validated how I was emotionally showing up in the conversation without having to insert herself into the narrative. And so despite it being a mutual check-in, it was just really nice to have someone apply, just empathy to our moment. Now, that goes to my next trait. Empathy will mature you and empower those around you. Like I said earlier, if empathy is sacrificial in nature, that means that you have to put a greater value on the other person over your own needs. And what that does is it empowers another person to become the best version of themselves, as well as it matures you to actually be self aware to know how to effectively lead in a conversation or in a relationship or perhaps in a business meeting. Now, this goes to my last trait, and that is over time, empathy can evolve into a lifestyle rooted in emotional intelligence. So, again, if we understand that empathy gives us this superpower to understand how a person is showing up, then we can live in tune with ourselves and with others, making it a more harmonious situation. And on that note, we're going to wrap up today's episode. We're going to keep it super sweet, super cheeky, super short. But as a friendly reminder, empathy in its nature is sacrificial. And that is because it places a greater value on the needs of those than that of your own. And it gets me thinking all the time. I'm like, oh my goodness, imagine a world in which we use empathy to influence how we volunteer, how we vote, how we educate the next generation of leaders, or even how we love our spouses. Now, imagine all that you give, you actually receive in return because the world of those around you are constantly improving. And that's a wrap. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode and you have a fresh perspective on empathy. But before I peel off, I do want to leave you with one song recommendation. This is actually one of my favorite artists. His name is Goldford, and this song is called Orange Blossom. And in his own words, he describes this song about being one filled with love, patience, and slowing down to appreciate that everything you'll ever need exists in the present moment. And so I'm so excited because he's actually coming to Seattle next week, or actually this week. And so me and the boys are going to go see him perform. But anywho, on that note, be more empathetic, be emotionally intelligent, and have a powerful day.